Well, hi there. Thanks for joining us today. Always glad to see you and glad to have a chance to share some of my friends with you all who are trying to build teams. We hope that all of the Skype interviews that we do are a help to you as you try and build and maximize your team. One area that really seems to be important, I think maybe ought to be the most important person on staff other than the senior pastor, is the children's pastor. And I never really understood that when I was a pastor, but you know, if you don't have a good children's ministry, you don't have a growing church. And if you don't have a growing church, it's just not a lot of fun. And one of the more common requests we get at the firm is to help churches find good children's pastors. And so we've learned a little bit about this. One of the main ways we've learned about this is befriending a guy you're going to meet right now, Michael Chanley. Michael is on the all-world team of children's pastors. His resume is pretty awesome. In fact, I'll tell you this, Michael's the only children's pastor I know who served in active combat duty as a Marine. Do you have a Marine as your children's pastor? Don't think so. Michael, thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. Got some pretty exciting things going on, and just give us an update on your life for a second.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I do have to, just for the sake of my honor of being a Marine, I have to tell you, I didn't serve in actual combat. I did serve during a period of combat, but no one ever shot at me while I was in the Marine Corps.
Only once you got into church work, right?
Well, I've been shot at, but not in the Marines. Yeah, those children, man, in the church, they're yeah. So I work for International Network of Children's Ministry, and what we do through INCM is we do conferences and training. Our purpose statement is to serve, serve, serve. That means we exist to serve God and to serve those called to serve His children. And the way we do that is by forming networks with publishing companies and with the local churches here in the U.S. and then abroad to do training that works for the local community. We don't go anywhere and do training without first asking what we can do to serve the local church. And we're not a publishing company, so we don't have any kind of, there's no product to proliferate or anything like that. So everything we do is focused on the needs of the local children's ministry and the local church. So that leads us to some really creative training opportunities in Belize and Australia and Egypt and the UK. Hong Kong. I'm just thinking of some of the places we've been recently. We just came back from an event in Mexico where we launched our first ever Spanish-speaking conference. Lots of really exciting stuff going on.
That's awesome. And people might not know this about you, but Michael served on the team at Southeast Christian, which is one of the larger churches in the country, does things really well. And kind of somewhere along that timeline, started what I call the Facebook for children's pastors. I'm not sure if that's a good way to describe it, but CMConnect has been a project of yours for a long time. Give us a quick overview of just what that is.
Yeah, definitely. About 5.5 years ago, I created a social network for children's pastors. It very much is like a Facebook. You know, for me, as a children's pastor, if I shared something on Facebook, or anywhere else and asked, hey, what do I do with these kids that are biting one another or whatever in my children's ministry? Because of my background in the Marine Corps and then growing up kind of pagan, there's a lot of people I'm friends with on Facebook who would give me a lot of advice. Much of it would land me in prison. And so CMConnect is a really unique niche community of about 11,000 different children's pastors from 120 different countries and 170 different denominations are represented there, and it brings together all these people who are really passionate about children's ministry and who have a vision for serving children and serving Jesus, and it's a very, very unique community. It's completely free, and it's always been free. It's paid for by a few advertisers that help us out, and then we have a subscription service that people can subscribe to. But it's been a blessing to see how it's grown from literally just a couple of hundred people to 11,000 people. There's not anything else like it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and so in all that time that you've worked with CMConnect and on a children's staff and just traveling the world, you know, some things come to mind. I've got a bit of an idea from some things I've learned from you, but maybe there are pastors out there that are evaluating children's pastors or looking at them. When you're looking at children's pastors across the world, what would you say are a couple of things that mark the best from the rest?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I would say the biggest difference between a good children's pastor and a great children's pastor is definitely calling. When churches hire people who understand that their calling is not just to do child care and that they're really called to impart God's truth to this generation, it makes a tremendous difference. You see the calling as an important thing, and then you see leadership as a growing need and as in a bigger and bigger issue. Leaders who really understand that their role is to build teams and to be a leader of leaders and to disciple a generation, it makes all the difference. And I think that's probably the biggest distinction between someone who is a children's pastor and someone who really, really understands the root of our calling and is really excelling.
That's awesome. I've heard it said before. I'd love to hear your thoughts on a comment that, smart children's pastors, a good children's pastor knows how to entertain kids. Smart children's pastors know how to disciple kids. Brilliant children's pastors focus on working with the parents. Is any resonance there? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely, and more than just the parents, but the leaders that are in their community. The ones who really, really are growing and are really seeing tremendous fruit are networking with other children's pastors and networking with other leaders in their community. Instead of sitting down and trying to figure out how to do a budget, which many children's pastors aren't trained to do, they're connecting with the CPA who lives in who attends their church, and they're asking them, "Hey, what do I do with this, and how do I launch this program?" Or they're sitting down with an operational director from a local corporation and asking them how to build a program that's going to be successful and is going to grow. And you see that type of networking and that type of intentionality in people who really, really understand leadership and want to grow as a leader and want to do better for their church and for the kingdom.
So let's flip this around a little bit. Let's say you're that brilliant children's pastor, and maybe, just maybe, the children's budget is not funded as well as it could be. I know that probably never happens in church, but if you're a children's pastor and you need to go to your pastor and approach them and say, "I really need some more funding here," or "I need one more staff person," or have you got any insights as to some things that you might think through or steps you might take in approaching that conversation?
Sure. So for a children's pastor who's going to like their leadership team and asking for more funding?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say think through the details. Ask yourself every question that you can imagine that they're going to ask, and then sit down with someone who's not your leader and share with them your vision and ask them to think critically through some questions so that you can cover your bases before you sit down and waste the leadership's time. You don't want to waste their time. You want to have thought through things already. If you can build a program and you can show what the measurable results are going to be, then people are going to be more keen to accept your ideas because it shows that you've put some thought into it. And those are all really good practices for any type of program. But before you do all that, I think it's really important that you think through. I guess the best example of anything like that, it comes from the book of Nehemiah, where you see Nehemiah as a cupbearer and he hears the news about his city having fallen to waste, and the first thing he does is he just goes to God in prayer. And if you read through that story, it's not like he prays and then immediately goes and talks to the king. He prays and fasts and just is silent until eventually the king is like, "Hey, what is it that's on your heart? What's going on?" So, don't rush it. Be still. Wait for God. Be patient. Develop a plan. But then pray over that plan and ask God to give you the right words and the right wisdom, and that your leadership will see what's going on.
That's awesome. I might add two little things there that I've noticed. Having sat in the senior pastor's chair, it was usually the student pastor that came wanting more money, but whoever it is, I'm asking myself two things. Have you already exhausted your existing options? In other words, is there a volunteer you hadn't tapped? So if somebody walks in my office and says, "Here are the 10 things I've done to try and do this without asking for more funding," or the 5 things or whatever. And then the other piece I would say is, much like investors, you're looking for the return on investment. What is this? I mean, it sounds selfish, but what's this going to do for me or for the mission of the church or the larger piece and not just your silo? So, how will this affect everything?
Well, and I think that's a hard thing for children's pastors to get, because they're focused on this little area of the church, and they're coming and they're selling an idea that they're super passionate about to someone who sees the whole picture. And often, I've talked to children's pastors who get frustrated because the groups ministry or the youth ministry is getting more focused than they are, but they don't realize that the senior pastor is looking at the whole picture, and it has all these things they have to manage. And so that's really good insight. I think that's really helpful. There has to be a measurable thing, and being able to show some sort of, in business terms, an ROI, a return on investment, really helps to think through the business side of what the church has to manage.
That's good stuff. So tell me, you're traveling all over the world, you're seeing all these trends happen. What are some of the things that children's pastors ought to be aware of that are going on now that are maybe new or back in fashion? Seems like things come and go. What are you seeing out there that might be a new learning for people that are watching today?
Yeah, I think, and it's got to do as much with the new generation of people who've been advertised to their whole lives and are keenly aware of different types of marketing schemes and such. But I think there's a new growth of people who they see through all the fabric that goes into different types of curriculum and resources, and they see things for what they are. They see more to the heart of what's being taught and what's behind everything. So there's this authenticity that you see in different movements around the world, where it's not about selling a thing or trying to get people to buy a certain widget or puppet or whatever. It's really about how do we reach kids and teach them about Jesus. And you see this unity of people coming together around that idea, and it's been really, really exhilarating. In the Middle East, there is this tremendous growth in the church that is not. It's not a story that anyone's telling. It's not even known, and it's probably best that it stays that way, because it creates dangerous environments for them. All around the world, people more and more are aware of the spiritual importance of reaching kids, of taking a knee and teaching a child about Jesus, and the church is seeing fruit from that. The church is growing when they realize the importance of children's ministry.
That's cool. So if you're a senior pastor watching this and you're saying, I need to find a great children's pastor, what do you see maybe common traits among churches that are able to attract great children's staff? What are they doing, not just in the recruiting part, but how they're wired up? What are they doing that makes a children's pastor say, I want to go work there?
Yeah, This is gonna sound maybe bad, and I hope it doesn't hit anyone the wrong way. But there's a growing number of men who have made children's ministry a career. And as I've talked to people, like in Australia, 90% of children's pastors are volunteers. There's a lot of them that do children's ministry there, but they're bi or tri-vocational because they have to provide for their family. What's happened here in the U.S. is that because there are so many churches, and because children's ministry is developing more and more as a calling and more as a need, and people become more aware of it, is churches now are competing to try and find the best children's pastors. And so because they're competing with one another, it's caused the market to rise in terms of what churches are willing to pay people. That's been really positive, because it allows more people to be able to make a living while doing what they love to do and what they feel called to do. So, if you're a church that that is trying to hire a children's pastor, and you're expecting someone to relocate their whole family across the country, and you only want to pay them $35,000 or $40,000 a year, it's just going to be really hard to find someone who is a top-notch leader of leaders who's willing to make that type of move outside of just God calling them to your church, which can happen. I don't want to dismiss that at all, but it's at the end of the day, they've got to take care of their family. They've got to make those decisions. And if they're looking at different options of where to be called and where to go and serve, there's churches all around the country that are paying double that now for children's pastors. It's absolutely amazing what has happened in the last 20 years.
I would say even in the last 5 years, since the recession began, I see the same thing happening. And I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but the caricature I have is normally the church has a children's ministry. There's a mom who's a school teacher or a librarian or something like that. She complains one too many times about the children's ministry, and so the pastor says, you know what? I think you could help us find a solution. And off you go. And then, you know, they do a great job, but relocating that person from somewhere means uprooting their spouse and whatever they're doing with their life, which is usually something besides children's ministry. It's not enough to move a whole family. So I would totally agree with you. Salary's just right up there.
It's a big deal, and I think vision's a big deal. And hearing, I think this is probably even, because I know children's pastors, I know that, you know, it makes it sound like people are all about money, and I don't mean that at all. But I think that people who really understand children's ministry are all about vision, and they're all about the calling. And so when you have a senior leadership team that understands the importance of children's ministry and they can communicate that to a candidate, I think that is a tremendous difference too. And I think that it, you know, creating a facility and a space for kids and families that encourages families to come, I think all those things show that you're not just saying we value families and kids, but you're really communicating it to the community. And I think those things attract the top-notch children's pastors too.
That's awesome. Hey, let me ask you this. So you've got your candidates. You've found 4 or 5 people. Maybe they're local. Maybe they're homegrown from your church. Maybe you're flying them in from somewhere. What, if you're hiring a children's pastor, what would be some of the questions you would ask, and what would you be looking for in answers?
So if I'm sitting in the seat of the senior pastor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would ask about calling. And, you know, the red flags for me would be, well, I just stumbled into this and I didn't really want to do this. You know, the things that I would look for would be someone who understands that and really believes that their role in the church is to disciple children and to teach them about Jesus in their most formative years. Those are things that would be big green lights to me. Things that would be red lights to me would be someone who has only focused on using one type of curriculum or one way of thinking. And the reason that would be a red light for me wouldn't be because there's necessarily any value over one curriculum or over the other, which I think some people would disagree with that. But the thing is that if you're a children's pastor and if the tides are changing and if the needs of the church are different from the curriculum that you're using, then you need to be able to think outside of the box and find a resource that works for that church community. And it may not be what they've always used. So a willingness to be able to try new things, to take risks, to build programs, and probably most of all, just the ability to be a leader of leaders. I would look for anything that shows that person is capable of leading teams and developing leaders, because at the end of the day, if the church grows, and that's hopefully what your goal is, I think that's biblical, then you're going to need to be able to have a team leader for your children's pastor who may be great on stage and may be great with kids, but can also lead leaders, can also lead teams, can lead parents, can call people into the vision, and can get them to engage to a point that their role is really just maintaining all of these leaders who are serving and being the church to the kids. That's
great. I think that's going to be helpful for people who are looking for children's pastors. If you're a children's pastor looking for community, go to CMConnect.org. Is that right? Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
And you can log in for free, create an account, and you'll be instantly wired in with 11,000 children's pastors. If you need anything from INCM, you can check them out on the web as well at incm.org. And Michael, I just really appreciate you. We're going to throw your Twitter handle up there. You're pretty social media savvy, so that should be on the screen somewhere before we hang up. And I really appreciate the friendship and all you're doing to help the kingdom. I tell people all the time, the children's pastor search is one of the harder ones there is. And I was running around, some years back, and one search was just making me crazy. This is when we first got going. And I just said, Lord, that's it. I'm not doing these anymore. And that's the way it is. I'm going to be the guy who just does senior pastor searches. And unless you show me a sign today, and I know I'm not supposed to pray this way, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but hey, I'm really frustrated. And that day, I ended up getting asked by a friend to come sit, and it was a friend that you couldn't say no to come sit and listen to a session in a conference. And it was Kay Warren, and she was talking about her adoption push. and she just let these pastors in this conference have it. She said, you know, we serve the only faith that talks about kids, the only guy who walked the earth who said, I'm the way to God. You better welcome children or you're in trouble. And then she said, you know what? If you're not using part of your life and work to welcome children into the kingdom, you're probably not a Christian. And I'm like, are you kidding me, God? So that, I think about a month after that's when I called you and said, I need to get to know you and get to know what's going on. And it's just been great to learn from you, man. I really appreciate your time.
Well, it's a blessing and honor to serve. You know, if any of the people you connect with, you know this, but I'll just share it with your audience. If any of the churches out there are looking for training for their children's ministry team, the organization I work for now, INCM.org, we do conferences and training. We've got 2 big national conferences coming up. They're called CPC. One's on the East Coast and one's on the West Coast. We'd be thrilled to have you be a part of our ministry, or to come and do a local training at your church. Just shoot me an email or contact us, and we'll get back with you and figure out how we can serve your team.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll look for you next time. And if there's any way we can serve you, just reach out. We're right here. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Wayne.